Welcome, folks. Starting to talk now about construction's competency. Obviously, a big overlap with the previous discussions we've had. And we're looking at the issue, the action, and the culture in this discussion. So, again, those of you who may already been using it, the code for Slido is the same. Slido being the question at sli.do, if you've not already got it out. And the code is 537970. So the app is, or the website to go to sli.do, and the event code 537970. So we'll start off with a quick round of introductions. Perhaps, Andy, if you kick us off down there.
Yeah, no worries. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Painting. I'm the director of Attis, a company that provides principal designer support, and I'm also director of the Institute of Construction Management. My background is I did 23 years in the Navy as a submariner. I then got a real job and started looking after a team of safety engineers, and then became the chief engineer of Portsmouth Naval Base. So I have a little bit of a background in understanding what happens when designs don't work for the operators, how to make things safe, and how to look after the overall design by being a technical authority. Thank you.
James.
Yes, hello there, everybody. My name is James Allen. My day-to-day job is I'm a glass safety risk consultant and glass security risk consultant. And also, like Andy, I'm also a director at the Institute of Construction Management. Again, just to give you a little bit of background into myself, I got into glass safety, glass security risk assessing from the window film industry, of which my father, who owns ACO Consulting, which is the family business.
I qualified as a quantity surveyor with the sole intention of being a building surveyor. Having seen a lot of different designs, so I've worked on everything from parks and landscapes through to civils on Canary Wharf. I provide expert witness reports. I get sent all around the country on these, looking at defective workmanship and defective design. When the Lakanal fire happened is when people got to know more about me. And so the media, etc., come to me when there's fires or disasters, anything for, so straight away with Grenfell, I was out on that through to the collapse in Miami. And, you know, really it's been an interesting journey to where I've got now. I never set out to get here. But this is where I've ended up providing expert reports and specifying exactly what has gone wrong and who got it wrong.
Tony.
Tony Ball. I'm Managing Director of Madigan Gill. We're a specialist contractor in the construction industry. Prior to that, I've spent the career in main contracting and developing background. Held senior management positions for a number of the large-scale residential developers and contractors. Looking out the window here, can see a number of the schemes that we've been involved with and been part of delivering and constructing. So my background, whilst a QS by trade, I've always been involved in the construction, the design, the procurement, and on-site the delivery of buildings right through to the occupation. So that's me.
And I'm Nick Horton, Head of Marketing at Sapphire. Work at the early stages of projects with architects and other people building better standards in balconies. So we're here to talk about competency, very closely linked with the theme we were looking at earlier. But the first question we've got is, what are the current issues which are facing the industry, particularly regarding the skills shortages, which we're regularly talking about, and also the workforce competency? Perhaps, James, if you want to start us off on that.
it's quite a good topic to start off with, actually. The skill shortage, clearly there is one, as we've probably realised, within the construction industry for quite some time now. What the driving force is behind it, I think there's a multitude of things. Sorry, what was the rest of the question, Nick? Sorry.
The skill shortage in the workforce competency. Perhaps, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, do you want to?
Probably we de-skill people, or we don't have enough people in there to do the job. We start taking people from a lesser level of competency, and we accept that, and that's a problem because we say, no, they might not have this quite level, we'll be okay with it. Another problem with the competency within the construction industry especially is there is no real standardization or standardized approach to what competency should look like. Everybody has different courses that they've done with different people, different tier ones, they're non-transferable. So there's lots and lots of problems about understanding what the right course, what the right level should be.
Tony.
I think as well that one of the big problems was the destruction of the more technical colleges and changing them into universities. I went to a polytechnic. We had very practical teaching. We had people who'd actually worked on the job with their hands, and they'd worked their way up from the ground upwards. And I was lecturing part-time at South Bank when it became a university, and they set about getting rid of all the people with the practical knowledge and replacing them with people who'd done no more than fly a desk in an office. And we lost all of the practical training that went on. If we can get back to practical training right at grassroots, teaching architects, engineers, the people who are building it, the quantity surveyors, the building surveyors, what actually goes on site, rather than coming off with just a degree, with just theoretical information, that would be a big improvement.
Come back to you in a second, James, but Tony, tell us a little bit from your experience.
I think the competency has been a challenge and training since I've been in the industry. I don't think we've ever properly addressed it. We, fairly recently, or not most recently, been reliant on European labour, and I think that's papered over cracks where our own training, development, and apprenticeships of our own in society and in this country. From a labour shortage, I think we've seen the impacts that's gone on with regard to Brexit and policies with regard to immigration status. We've obviously had the impacts of COVID, and I think that's put an extra strain on when the industry's carried on at a pace already on quite a limited resource. We're starting to see some of that come back to a degree now, but I think that's really highlighted an issue that we've got. I'm a wholehearted going back to some of the points that's been raised about the better understanding and presentation of our industry within schools, getting people more invested into our industry, demonstrating what it's about, not perhaps what they see on a local level, and then bringing forward some of those the proper skills and the proper training of actually that's required to go forward out onto the sites.
James, do you want to?
Yeah. Sorry. I think just sort of following on from what Arnold was saying and going down there. What we do have is this idea of where there's so many courses taught at different places, different levels. The individuals that are doing the training courses all learn at different levels, and once you've got that, and the size of the group that are actually trying to learn it, and you've only got one or two people who are trying to put the information across, they're not really taught how to do things properly. From when I look at my own personal experience, is my mum's a teacher. She's been a teacher for all of her working life, and that's at primary school level. And she has explained to me about how even from a young child point of view, if you've got all the kids learning at different levels, then they're all going to be, from the competence scenario, their competence levels are all going to be at different levels as well. So when they then go out into a real world scenario, and they then have to apply that knowledge that they've got, whether or not that's competent knowledge or whether they've taken it on board, how they've obtained all of that knowledge in the first place, whether it was from a textbook or whether it was actually from the course tutor at the beginning, that that's when further down the line we have got these issues and the skill shortages. Again, that has that knock-on effect as well. So yeah, just to kind of follow on from what Arnold was saying about the courses, and like we have NVQ different levels, and you might have somebody that goes to do an NVQ course at a particular college. Somebody else goes and does it somewhere else, but they could, even though they've got the same qualification, when they go out into the real world, how they then apply that knowledge is where the issue starts. And that's one thing we've really seriously got to address.
So there's a couple of things we've been touching on so far of kind of the skill set of people in the industry. Already in the previous panel, we looked at some of the issues which come with perhaps competent people taking shortcuts, not having the things in place to stop that. But perhaps if, Andy, if I can ask you this question, which you've got from the industry, perhaps tackling the first bit of that, of how do we engage with people to actually get young activists to take up a practical career? So we're bringing new skill sets and actually bringing more competency into the construction industry.
That's a big question, that one is. We've been given guidance from the government to go, everybody needs to have a degree for everything. And that's really undone a lot of the good work that was going out there with people who are going more practical side of things. How we undo that? I don't know. I don't think it's a simple answer. I think we have to go back into the universities, to colleges, and explain to people that there actually is a way forward working on sites, actually using your hands and going through an apprenticeship type position. When I joined the Navy as an apprentice, so I learned how to make round things square and square things round for some unknown reason. How we get that back into it, I don't really know. I don't think it's a simple answer. Sorry.
I think we need to go back to into schools, and not everyone's an academic. And I think we need to spot some of that early and actually provide some of the great courses that sort of BTEC and that do, and bring them earlier into schools and actually showcase some what's involved, not just in trades, but in other parts of industry and other sectors. And I think there's a lot of young people who disengage with education very early because they're not academic, and I think we need to cater for that a better way. And that's a great avenue for us in our industry, to actually pick people up and learn and develop people at the right age.
Sure, and I think particularly with the digital things and the drive towards that from Hackett, as we had 2023 and so on, that's likely to be more attractive if we can articulate it as an industry to a younger person than potentially walking around in muddy boots and on a site. But if we perhaps move the conversation on slightly to more kind of the role of competency, one of the people I spoke to during the break mentioned to me that the word "should" comes up a lot. But I guess probably the next part of that question is, how do we turn a should into does? And what is the role in construction to actually, throughout the supply chain and throughout manufacturers, to actually build competency? Tony, I know you've got a lot of experience in this, and perhaps start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a inherent sort of behaviours that's embedded into us in the industry of how we've always done things, and routes that we've gone down, and whether that be through sort of procurement or design or routes, and that's hard to shake off, because when you come into an industry or you come in as young, you've been taught how to do it. We've always done it this way. We're always going to do it that way. And that's quite challenging, actually. Whatever discipline you're in is actually to break that mould. So I think it's about training, but it's about companies also looking and being pragmatic in doing things in a different way, and being brave enough to embrace some perhaps new method and innovative techniques. And in my mind, and we'll come on to it probably later on in the questions, it's about engaging and bringing together the stakeholders together early in the piece, and bringing those together, because not everyone's got an expertise in everything, and there's lots of gaps we've got, and actually bringing together those teams and communicating and working in a collaborative way is the success of a scheme and a project.
So building a collaborative supply chain, there's obviously, and I appreciate it's CITB, which is one of the questions which has come through from the audience. There's a lot of controversy around CSCS cards and whether they actually drive the right behaviours in the industry. But is it actually all about education, or is it actually about practically having the right mindset and the right approach in building the right tools in the arsenal, if you like? Perhaps Arnold, if you start helping that.
Well, it depends on mindsets of people. I'll give you an example that quite a few years back, there's a guy that I'd met when I was doing a landlord and tenant survey. He was unemployed at the time. And a couple of months later, I met him in another property in the local authority, plumbing in a kitchen sink and doing other bits and pieces. He absolutely had no training whatsoever, but I will give it to him that he did have a Reader's Digest manual that he was following. So I would say that he had the mindset to get it right rather than trying to make it up as he went along. And so you've got to actually get a mindset into people is if you don't know, find out, research, go and read, go and ask other people. You know, don't simply hide away and think, well, I'll just bodge my way through this and it will be somebody else's problem to sort out, which I find far too often in properties that I survey. So it's a mindset of being able to think. That's the first thing that needs to be taught of all pupils and all people, how to think for yourself, how to question, how to not simply accept what it says on the back of a tin, but actually go to have a look at what it actually says in the test reports or how you should actually apply it, etc. Go into more depth, and the fact that you never stop learning. I'm all the time learning, you know, but it's coming in now with the modern methods of construction that I'm coming across stuff that I have never seen ever before. And there's nothing out there for me to find out how it should have been done, how it should be put together, how it should be maintained. We were talking earlier, it was mentioned earlier, about timber buildings. Well, we've got one high-rise one in Murray Grove in Hackney. It's a CLT building. Stack of cards, you could almost say like Ronan Point, apart from they're stacked slightly differently. And I went to the architect and said, what happens when you've got dry rot in this timber building? How do I repair it? What happens when there's been a fire in that room? How do I repair it? How do I get those timbers out without having to demolish the whole of the building down to that level to replace the CLT panels? Answer, they can, none. The architect who's designing it doesn't know how to repair the building. And so even we've got loads of training coming along for people who are going to be working on these buildings, there's no manual as to how to maintain a CLT building. There's nothing there. And so it's not just the training of the people who's going to be doing the jobs at the end of how to do it, but somebody's actually higher up has got to work out how to do it and then to teach them. And it's this teaching thing. People aren't thinking of the consequences of what they're doing right at stage one. And if they did, the training would be easier.
It's really valid points there. And Tony, I'd be interested in your take from having worked as a director at some of the major house builders. Kind of how reliant should a developer or should the construction industry be on actually getting good advice from the right people, and who are the right people in that process?
Yeah, I mean, yes, you're right. I mean, one of our successes, I think, certainly some of the complex buildings that we put together was actually bringing in together the right stakeholders at the right time, and trying to assemble that. It's not always easy to understand who the right people are. I think we had a discussion on that earlier, because who has got the right level of competence and who is the right people to talk to. And certainly when you're pushing boundaries, perhaps in the size, scale, complexity and construction methods, that's actually even more difficult to unpick. If you're going into new worlds, who are the right people who have got the expertise? But I think, certainly surrounding yourself with the right team, the right expertise, bringing in elements of supply chain in regard to product manufacturers, I think that's a massively overlooked point, in that, design has to be based upon a series of products, but people often, get nervous by procurement routes, or say we can't engage or go directly to that manufacturer. We're naming someone. Well, an architectural designer has to design a building around some sort of product or design. So perhaps best you influence that, or who that's going to be. And I think there's so much knowledge that's contained within those particularly specialists that we don't tap into enough. And actually bringing those parties in when they're bringing together complexities, because bringing all these parts together, the sum of the parts to make the completed building, is complex. And I just think, people at the right stage, is fundamental. And we've had successes, we've had failures from not doing it. I've had some huge successes from doing it. And I think it's that goes back to my sort of point probably on behaviours, in that it's bucking the trend slightly to bring that team together early. But I think there are huge successes in that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of collaboration which does happen positively, and there's obviously a lot of work to be done as well. And one of the questions we've got here is around value engineering. Who wants to take that first?
I mean, I think value engineering is probably one of the most abused words in the industry.
Yeah,
really, to be honest with you, it's sort of lost all essence of what people talk about value engineering, and a lot of the time it's about reducing cost is when the word comes out. I mean, true value engineering is finding an alternative solution that saves time, money, or makes the building efficient. And I think often it's wrapped around in cost cutting.
Without reducing the level of safety and security at the same time.
But I think, to my mind, that you need to reverse it. If you're doing too often, value engineering or looking at alternatives is done too late, after a building's been designed, or you've been out to tender, or you've done everything else, and you've gone through months of design and consideration, and then shock horror, you get bids back, or you engage with specialist contractors, and then you realise you either can't afford something, or something can't be built, or those two components don't go together, and everybody's running around like headless chickens trying to get together an element of design that does work, or engage with stakeholders and add something, redo a design, relook at other products at the last minute. And I think that creates a lot of the issues that the legacies that's built into our buildings at the moment.
True value engineering is things like, certainly from a balcony point of view, looking at how you can optimize your anchors, so you can design out anchors, which improves it fire, thermal, cost, carbon.
It is, and I think you need to take that concept and bring it much earlier in the piece to when you're designing. That's the concept of true value engineering. You're not going to capture everything, but it's taking all that, having that mindset there and bringing that a lot earlier. And I think, for example, not plugging it, but your configurator tool is great at that, because once you've got through planning stage, the external envelope of your building is pretty much set. Actually designing elements about efficiency of balcony styles, type designs, how you're going to construct them, using some of the digital tools very early assists you in that. Because otherwise, certainly when I have my developer hat on, having spent years trying to get a planning permission for a building, the last thing I want to do is have to go back into the planners after we realise that something doesn't quite work or fit, so that then you're stuck with something that's a legacy. So there's elements you have to do really early on.
Yeah, it's a good point. And for those of you who haven't seen it, there's a balcony configurator on coach.balconies.global. Well worth having a look. You can download BIM details, you can look at the costing and structural calculations and many other things through that process. But coming back to the point around value engineering, James, what are your thoughts on value engineering?
I think what we've got to do is, as soon as I started hearing more about the term value engineering and watching the Grenfell inquiry, and then really understanding from the fire engineering point of view, from risk assessment, from you name it, every sort of side to the construction industry, who then feeds into it, has a direct link into how the building is designed, how it's constructed, how it's then lived in, how it's then worked in. The point about value engineering, I believe that phrase, I think, should just be scrapped, because there are so many different interpretations of what value engineering actually means. But it's like most things to do with any kind of legislation, mandatory regulation. It's everybody's interpretation of what that is. And I think if we're going to actually do anything with it, I think if everybody's got their own ideas, and it comes back to what we were talking about with mindset and having a competent mindset with it. If we're not all on the same page and then looking at the competency side, then the value engineering only ever actually means one thing. It's just driving down the quality of the materials, the quality of the workmanship, the quality of say the materials and the products, the quality of the or the value engineering of the individuals themselves that are actually doing the work, and yeah, that whole thing to do around. Well, if you look at value engineering as a term, I think one of the main building regs that we don't actually use enough of is building reg 7, which is to do with materials and workmanship. And I still can't get an answer from the LABC or so forth why, and many other organisations, the HSE and many other things to do with around the construction industry, who can't tell me why building reg 7 is not enforced more, to help to drive up that knowledge and to help with the raising that bar, it's a kind of phrase from the Construction Industry Council, which should then raise that level of value engineering.
Dr. Andy.
Value engineering, how do we think about value engineering? It's about understanding the risk. It's about coming up with mitigation against that risk so it reduces it to as low as reasonably practicable. It's about demonstrating it in the end. This is part of your safety case, which goes into your golden thread. It's all together. The problem with value engineering is our understanding of it. It's the top. Maybe should we look at how competent the client is, how competent the designer is, how competent the principal designer is, and how competent the principal contractor is. Yeah, everybody. What we're doing at the ICM at the moment is we're now looking into the competency of clients. And it's about not just how much money turnover you've got, how well you look after your people. It's about how you understand how you start a project. Do you do due diligence? Do you actually look at your supply chain? Do you try and involve your supply chain collaborative approach where you bring them in early, you have those discussions, you look at new concepts, you bring in the architects, the designers. It's all about having the client trained and or not trained, but measured against how good they are at that. That's the way to start driving this forward. And once you understand what value engineering is about, it's about managing risk, then we're all okay.
Arnold, got any thoughts on this one?
I'll just simply say that value engineering is used in the wrong way. It's always, you always find it's cost cutting, and that is all that they apply to it. They don't actually think of value engineering for the future cost, for the future maintenance, for the future well-being of the building and the people in there. And so we've actually got to start looking as well for value engineering into terms of cost in use.
So, taking that conversation on a little bit, and Tony, perhaps if I can ask you, does collaboration actually increase quality? Is that a simple formula, or is it not that simple?
Well, I think it improves quality, as in if you've got a coherent, well-considered, joined-up design, then I think that is your starting point for improving quality. But I think quality goes much then beyond that. But I mean, that's your starting point. So I think if you're bringing elements in together too late, disjointed, not well considered, then it's actually quite challenging to achieve something that's a quality end product. And not just an end product, but a quality building that people want to live and use. It's not just about the bricks and mortar, it's about the intended use of that building and occupation and use of that building. So I think that's the challenge if you don't start off with that. Of course, then quality goes through to many different threads beyond that, in relation to the competency of the staff, the management, the expertise, and that goes on with the standards and controls that's put in. But I think the starting point is about bringing together the right people, getting the design right at day one. That's your starting point. So without that, if you're not doing that, you are fighting to a degree a losing battle.
So perhaps just put it out to the audience here. Has anyone got a question which they may not have put on Slido? No? Okay, we'll move on. So how can each party be involved in the in achieving the benefits, the overall outcome, especially at each of the handover stages? I assume this is more linked in with the new gateways and so on. I guess it also relates to Regulation 38, but Andy, would you like to start with this one?
If we're talking along the REBA stages, the gateways, at each end of each stage, you should have understood, at the beginning of it, you understand the risk. I will harp on about risk, unfortunately, it's kind of what I do. If you understand the risk and you understand what you put in place and you keep running a register all the way through your project, and at each handover, you look at the design, you see if it's addressed the risk, you see if there's any outstanding risk or where you want to go forward. You have the gateways, we shall have a design review, we should have a review of the design before you pass on to the next stage. Put all your effort into the very beginning and you should have an easy ride all the way through it. Should have. There's always going to be the curveball that comes to you, but you'll be prepared for it. You'll have understanding. You'll be able to manage it through mitigations.
So some interesting points there. If we perhaps move that conversation very slightly on as well from there, we've obviously got lots of things which are happening right now in with the COP summit and so on. There's lots of talk about the net zero. We've had a question here about net zero and passive house certification. If we're taking that kind of approach into the future and talk about risks, as you mentioned there, is that likely to affect the level of competency and the risk of not achieving things done properly, both from a safety point of view and perhaps from a carbon and so on?
If you're looking for the risk side of things, right, if you want to make it as low carbon impact as possible, then that's part of your original statement of requirement, surely. And therefore your design should meet that, and you shouldn't accept it if it doesn't. Okay, to get the perfect design is going to cost you a lot of money. To get the best quality is going to cost you a lot of money and going to take a lot longer. So there's a bit of a conversation you need to have at that point, how much effort you want to put into it. Will it improve competence? I'm not sure. Competence is outside of it. Competence is the people you choose to do the job for you. If they can't demonstrate that it's safe or it's carbon neutral or whatever, then that's an issue you have with them. You probably shouldn't be involved in them in the first place.
Oh no, you obviously look at risk and the responsibilities you said in your intro, but tell us what are your thoughts on this particular question?
Competency on site and ensuring that people actually build competently comes down to management and comes down to checking and comes down to not rushing people to get a job done. I see buildings where components were built in that were defective at the time of building in. Why is that? Because the person who's handed the goods, if he took it back and said, look, this is broken, will be charged the cost of those goods. So that comes off his subcontract. So what does he do? He'll build it in because he doesn't want to lose money. It's this sort of penny pinching and not actually looking at things which causes people to cut corners. It is going for the lowest price the whole of the time. So you get your plasterers going in, doing the dry lining and not putting in the continuous ribbon all the way around the ceiling, all the way down the walls, all the way along the floor, and all the way around all the penetrations. Why? Because it's quicker and cheaper to slot a few dabs up and push it up and forget the fact that you've now got heat loss going up inside that, right the way up into the loft, and you're not meeting the U values on that property, despite the fact it looks good. It also then comes down to the competence of people like BRE, who will write a report saying it complied with British standards when clearly it didn't, and other things as well. So there are people who are backing up bad processes on site on just for the contractors. It really is, train them, but when they're trained, make sure they're still doing the job properly. So we've lost all the things that we used to have. We used to have a site architect. Where's he anymore? Where's the site engineer? Where's the clerk of works? Where are the people actually making sure that the competence is there and that the buildings are actually built in accordance with British standards, in accordance with the building regulations, in accordance with CDM regulations, etc., etc. So it is a management thing, and it's not a thing of rush it up quick and get it done. One of the properties I abseiled, I could see when the site agent had the scaffolding struck. Why did he have the scaffolding struck when the building hadn't been pointed all the way up round the windows? It came up a set of windows, half height, and the rest of the building unpointed. Why? Because he'll get a bonus for completing on time and dropping the scaffold on time. And it's that sort of attitude which ends up with buildings costing a lot more at with legacy work. And the guy who was the site agent or whatever, well, he's off somewhere else. He's still got that money in his pocket, hasn't he? So you've got to actually look at it. Are we achieving using the policies we've got?
So how do we drive beneficial outcomes, Tony?
I just want to go back on other points. I thought it was interesting on the panel that was earlier when we talked about the construction of this building, for example, and it's made up of many SMEs. And I think when you break down who's involved in the business, there's so many parts and players that's in that. Yes, it might be a big facade contractor who's doing the facade to this building, but that's broken down into many small. There's an installation gang, a labour gang, a fixing gang. They're in a bunch of individuals who are on CIS, who's on price work. And the way that we fragment down and build and construct, I think that's really interesting, those behaviours and competency. It's really difficult to break down into that and get that skill set and that level. I think there's some things on the ground that can be done with regard when we used to do things like mock-ups and do a sample and used to bring the teams together and say, this is how we construct it. You do it live, not through 50-page instruction manual that's written down that most people lose the will to live after the page 2. But actually, let's do a live demonstration and actually bring down the manufacturer, bring in, and let's actually do and say, this is what's acceptable, this isn't what's acceptable. I think there's some old behaviours like that we've kind of drifted away from. We kind of need to sort of, bring ourselves back into.
Yeah, but it's also looking at my industry, looking from the glass and glazing industry, is that. I think gone are the days where the manufacturers of the glass or the manufacturers of the systems that then go into the double glazed units to then go into the frame and then installed into a building. A lot of training used to be done by the manufacturers themselves, and you then get the accreditation from or onto the accreditation lists on the supply chain and so forth. But the training side of it by the manufacturers, I think we've got to start looking back at, because they're the ones that design the products. They're the ones that manufacture it. They will have a better idea of then how it then gets used in situ as the final product, because you're then leaving it open to chance that the people who then are going out and fitting it know exactly what they're doing, because it's like, and excuse my language, it's crap in, crap out. And so basically, if you're not taught competently and from a competent source who knows exactly what they're doing from the very beginning, then the whole thing's a complete failure from start to finish. So yeah, we have to go back to the manufacturers.
Windows are a very good example of that. And someone who's been a window installer will say, well, I've installed this type of brand of window. For the last sort of job or the last number of years, I'm doing this brand. I'm going to put them together, assemble it exactly the same. Well, no, there's fundamental differences that could be in that then builds an inherent issue, and they're not particularly realising that. And it goes back to your point about sort of manufacturers, and I think I'm the great believer in these sort of mock-ups and demonstrating how something what good is. 2 other points just to raise on that. I think price work is a big challenge because we know the majority of the labourers and the guys who are on price work, and that leads to some of those behaviours that we spoke about, I think before. So I think they're sort of fundamentals that sort of affect all of what we've spoken about.
So we've talked about a bit about certification and so on in both the previous one and touched on it a little bit here. James, you've obviously dealt with a number of failures in the industry and stuff, but there's a lot of people who talk about certifications and how do the architects, developers, and other people actually making decisions on what the right companies to choose in that collaboration piece. How do they know whether a certificate is actually something which is driving competency, or whether it's just a kind of thing to be proud of?
Minefield.
It is literally a minefield when it comes to certification. And I know the previous panel were talking about certification and so forth. And Nick, what I've talked about, declaration of performance certificates. And then you've got the BRE, the BBA, the LABC. And going back to the culture thing and the mindset, it's so easy and so, it's so easy to quickly just go, let's just flick through the book, see which manufacturers have got a certificate for that product and go, all right. And in glass terms, we've got the BSEN 12600 flat glass impact test. And then when you look at what that actually says in the British standard, have the LABC given a certificate for that pane of glass there for the test product? But when you start looking at it, that test product which in the glass industry for an impact test measures 900 wide by 1900 high. It's got fully framed around the outside, gaskets all the way around the outside, like you would do with a picture frame on the wall at home. And what they then do is, and this is where the glass industry does kind of mislead the product, the UK and the rest of the world out there, is that they will say to you is that this product here is good for every situation or every scenario. It's a one size fits all. So when we start talking about certification, and the panel previously were talking about it, you've got to go and take that certificate and say, well, does it do exactly what it says on the tin? Where do I go and get this checked? And again, we're back down to money again and the cost of it. Who's going to go and pay extra money to go and possibly prove what they've already seen written on a certificate? But yeah, you've got a 50-50 decision to make. Either I do go by the certificate, or I go and get myself another certificate, which the insurance industry will then want to see, which is another thing which is quite a good point we might have to talk about later, is the insurance industry getting involved in certification, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that are taking the big risk financially. So yeah, the certification is a bit of a minefield. It's where do you start with it? Do you go to the BRE, the BBA? Do you basically believe what is written on that piece of paper? And I think looking at what's come out of Grenfell, no. I think we've got to actually open our mindset, have an open mind to it all. And you might have to actually spend that extra money for a peace of mind, because at the end of the day, if it's going into a residential block, in a commercial property, lives can be put at risk. And are you prepared to take that risk at the end of the day just because of what's written on a piece of paper?
So, quick one on that one.
Go for it, yeah.
Sometimes we let designers and the architects off the hook on this one. I don't know why we do it. If you're going to design something new, using a new technology, then it's up to the designer to make sure that they design something that's safe. It's law. It's quite well written down as well. And if they say to use a new product, they have to say what it has to be tested in accordance with. Yeah, they're responsible. They're signing off against that, and I can't see why they don't do it. And it does baffle me. In engineering, they have to do that, steel types, things like that. In most construction work I work on, we can see that. We can trace that through back to designer. What we're talking about here obviously shows that it's not being done everywhere.
It becomes more complex, doesn't it, when you start putting, you see the phrase compliant to BS.
That's not complex. I've been part of building warships. That's complex. So it's not beyond the wit of man. It really isn't. It's what we should expect of our designers and architects.
Yeah. It's also when you put the scenarios together, isn't it? Because particularly with balcony anchors, for instance, there's no particular test for a fire test. However, is it right you shouldn't fire test it? Absolutely no way. And there's various different products like that which are quite niche and don't have their own standard. But how do we get that holistic view? James, it looks like you're
but it's actually it wasn't about the holistic view. It's actually very much what you just made that point about with anchors. Balustrading and glass and infill panels, there's no actual impact test for barriers and on balconies or anything to do with the infill panels there. It is for these. But once you get onto a balcony or a balustrading, or which is there for a barrier, there's no impact test for a piece of glass that's there to protect a drop. And this is the stupid thing, is that's when the glass industry misleads and lies to the British public, thinking this glass is all right in every scenario that you want to put it. No, it's not. And that's where I think what we need to do is we need to start asking questions of the associations and the Glass and Glazing Federation and so forth. Why are you putting the public at risk? Because the certification again, and the mindset and having the open mind, we've really got to start pinpointing down to the manufacturers and the associations to be accountable for their for the information that they're putting out there into the public.
Arnold, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll continue with the glass scenario on this. When you go out and have a look at balconies, what do you see? You see the glass balcony either supported at the bottom and then flexing from there, or you see the glass infill panels with maybe 4 fixings on it. Now, when you've tested a load swung into a sheet of glass in a frame that is saying like a picture frame, with gaskets all round, that is going to bounce. You do that to your balcony with 4 fixings, that will go through it, because you've got 4 point loads on toughened glass, where the only strength is on the surface tension. And when you actually are going down to the manufacturers, what do you get on these things to do with glass balconies for maintenance? Wash it.
That's all you get in BS
That's
6105.
That's all you get in the British Standard. And what happened up in Birmingham was a school, which nice modern built school, and it had this walkway going out, and the sides of it were glazed with single sheets of toughened glass, and it went above a roadway where the teachers went down to park their cars. Comes the end of the day, school kids going out, you know what the lads are like, pushing, shoving, one of them trips, he hits the glass, he goes straight through it.
He fell 45 foot.
Onto the road, and the only thing that saved his life was he was wearing a backpack. And the fact is that these things, where you're grabbing it, it's only friction, and over time the glass drops out. It comes down, and as soon as the edge of toughened glass touches another surface which is rough or hard, it shatters. And you will find these glazing, I'm condemning them the whole of the time when I'm going around. I've condemned the glazing on the tower blocks that go between the O2 and the cable car, because they're only supported on the bottom. Yes, they've got 2 layers of safety glass, and it's got its laminate in between. But you have a party then, if people dancing around and they, you know, start leaning against it, and somebody's kicking the glass as well in time with the music, they're going to go over. That's going to fail. And so the whole of the time it's coming back to competence, and that competence and warning you and telling you things goes back to the manufacturers. It goes back to the people who are writing the British standards. But who writes the British standards? The manufacturers.
The industry does.
The industry does. So are they going to tell you that all this stuff they are selling you won't work in the ways that you're using it? Consider, always go back, read how it was tested, how it will perform under those tests, and say, is what I'm putting in the same as that? And this goes back to expanding foam as well. Use fire rated expanding foam. It can be used behind door frames. Rubbish. You have a look at the tests. The test is in a 23 centimetre deep blockwork wall. Blockwork, the material you're testing, ply, MDF, hardwood, softwood, 18 mil of the expanding foam, another block. And they test it. Oh, it passes its 1 hour, it passes its 30 minutes. Therefore, you can use it for your doors. And they'll put it on the thing saying that. They'll even tell you it can be used around pipes. Never been tested around pipes. They told you can use it around electric cables. The only cable I've ever found it tested around was a 4-core telephone cable and in a timber stud, and they'd filled the whole of the void of the timber stud with foam. You'll never see it. Always, if you're going to go away from here with increased competence, go back, read what it says on the certificates, read all the tested things, and say, is that how I'm having it installed? Because if it's not how you're having it installed, you can bet it probably won't work.
But that's certainly the case. There's a new glass, which is a Class A lamination, and that's certainly one to be careful on that. Look at the parameters, just a word of warning if anyone's designing glass balconies. You're welcome to speak to us as well. Anyway, moving from your type of party to a different type of party, which party should be funding the education and training in the industry, Tony?
It's got an interesting point. I mean, I think there's an onus on all businesses to contribute, into the training and development of our staff and in our industry. I mean, there's lots of questions been put around levies and how good them levies have been, and into lots of CITB and what use that's got out of that, and how good that's been, and what that's actually come into. There's questions about local authorities putting on requirements about apprentices and taking on numbers of apprentices. People do that as a like tick box exercise, and some embrace it really well. But I think there's an onus on all business and all business owners and companies to engage in and invest into sort of competency youth training and development of their staff. I don't think we'll need to be told it. I think we should embed it in what we do. And I think you guys in particular, when I look at if I look at Sapphire, going back to that, the success story you've had for bringing people in young, developing them, training them into your way of thinking, shows some of the success you can have.
So it's kind of almost putting the question back to the person who asked it, say which companies shouldn't be investing in training. Any other thoughts?
I think that government can help with training by making it completely tax-free on the company accounts, so that and actually even contributing towards it to encourage more training. So there is a certain government thing where they can be involved in encouraging better training as well. Yeah,
and perhaps also the ability to, I think, what we've seen through COVID is one industry is buoyant and other industries not. And I think this ability of transferring the skills is probably a gap where the government can assist in filling. So I think there's with certain sectors are sort of struggling. There's a lot of transferable skills, particularly into our industry, that could be brought across from other industries and that could probably be assisted with government. But I think there is government. I mean, I'm always worried everything's so slow, so bureaucratic and getting off the ground. And we've actually got an onus on ourselves as business owners and leaders to actually make it happen. Yeah,
I don't actually think, to be honest, I don't think the government would want to get involved in the training side of it, because if you actually dissect it all and actually see what parts of government sit on committees, what part of government sit on, especially at the BSI and everything else, there's always a political, financial, or commercial interest that they've got in what British standards say, all the product literature that goes out. So when it comes to training, then yes, you would hope that the government would want to get involved in it. But I think if they do get involved in the training, they're only just going to end up cutting their nose off to despite their face, because it would just throw out a huge can of worms to what messages they're trying to get out there, which they don't really want to be getting out there in the first place.
I think, if you're going back there are big changes when the comprehensive system came in, because a secondary mod school with practical training was looked down on by too many people. That's one of the problems we have in this country, is people look down on the people who are actually doing the buildings, who are actually getting their frozen half to death on a building site and getting their hands dirty. Is that it's this attitude of putting academics on pedestals and looking down on people below. And you actually see the same in the way that they're looked after. You'll get the professionals, if they go off sick, they get their sick pay. If you get the people further down, so when they get sent off for training, they get paid their full day wage. When you go down the level, it gradually reaches a point where when you're getting training, you're not getting paid. When you're off ill, you don't get anything. And that's a disincentive to working and a disincentive to the workers. And, so maybe I'm going to come across sounding more socialist, but, treat the people at the bottom a lot better and give them the abilities to move forwards and improve their life, recognise the skills that they do have, build upon them, and they will benefit and you will benefit.
So that leads us quite nicely on to the one of the next questions, which is how do we go about mitigating risk through taking an innovative approach? Tony, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about risk. I mean, I think risk is in many different guises, whether that be, risk in the deliverability of the scheme, risk on the viability of the scheme, commercial risk, risk actually in health and safety risk. So I think there's all different aspects of that we need to sort of consider. But I think in all aspects is that the more that we can get, in my mind, joined up, get more certainty early in what we're building, how we're building, what we're delivering, how we're going to deliver it, that goes along the ways to start mitigating those risks really early. And I think that's key to it.
And do you think part of that innovation, which has been mentioned there, is actually taking more stuff off-site and into much more controlled environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, when the situation is correct for it. I think sometimes, I've seen the sort of square peg round hole mentality when people are trying to use off-site manufacturing or techniques into situations that's not designed for it. I think certainly, look, elements or components or a structure that's created in a controlled off-site environment has got to have benefits to that's constructed in situ. Can't get away from some of the challenges that you've still got to manoeuvre, lift, get in position, and material movement elements. So you've got other risks that you need to consider in that. So I think it does have a place to play. You can argue in a counter that obviously you're slightly inheriting more risk, because unless you get that product that's manufactured off-site, delivered on time, built on time, in at the right stage of your job, then it's actually bringing in some other risks as well to it. So I think, like anything, it's managing it. What I like particularly about off-site construction is that it brings in a design discipline, around things being thought of early. It makes you think of early, because things are constructed off-site early. It makes you consider all different aspects very early on in the piece, and quite often they're left too late when you're building on-site in situ. And I think it brings in a consistency and a repetition that should be inherent in design. So I think we should almost bring into the thoughts of off-site and some innovative approaches off-site early in every scheme, even if you wasn't doing it that way, because it breeds a really good practice into your project.
Andy, what's your thoughts on this?
The problem with innovation, it's seldom less risky. Innovation means trying out new things, so it is inherently risky. So how do you reduce the risk by putting in innovation? You have to test it. You have to understand it's going to cost you a little bit to understand how the item you're designing works. Do that testing in-house in the factory, do those tests, prove it, get more confidence, then bring it into the mainstream, I guess, is the only way of doing it.
Yeah, and that's such an important area, isn't it? That thorough testing, and as we touched on, Arnold touched on it with balustrading, for instance, it's not just testing it in one scenario; it's testing multiple different aspects of the same thing in genuine real life scenarios.
But you've got to allow people to understand they can innovate. That's another problem.
I think one of the problems I've seen, and that I think we've moved away from a lot in design, is moving away from standard product. And I think actually there's a lot of good design that can be achieved by use of standard product that's been tested, and we understand what it can do, what it can't do. And we feel that often we're trying to reinvent the wheel, create something that's not a standard product. But actually really good design can be achieved by using standard components and products. And I think my view that de-risks certain elements, but there's often a concept when you're talking to design team that that's not innovative enough. But I think we go back to certainly in our business and look about actually really good design can be achieved by using those sort of tried and tested products.
But the customer drives the intention to innovate, because they want something new and shiny, don't they? So
possibly
there's a bit of give and take.
You think the customer needs it or where they're like,
they always end up wanting something that the other guy next door hasn't got.
And there's nothing new about using modern methods of construction. If you go back to the Tower of Babel, it says that they built with clay bricks and tar instead of stone and mortar. And the reason they were building their tower was to make a name for themselves. And you'll get that all the way around here, from Piano with his shard and everything else, reinventing the detail that's gone into this building with all those little fixings and everything. Making a name for himself, modern methods of construction, but this has been put together brilliantly. This building, I've got the books on it, and so there's nothing wrong with modern methods of construction, but you've actually, as you were saying, to look for the risks that you have. So you've got modular buildings. The problem with modular buildings is all the gaps all around the modules. How do you fire separate every module from every other module between the floors and the walls and the ceilings and everything, because you've got all these voids round? And what do you find in the modules that are going together for, let's say, student accommodation? You'll have your wall units hanging on the wall. How do you hang it on the wall? Well, you put a combustible material on the other side called plywood. And so you're now filling a void between the two buildings with plywood. How are you going to fire stop that? So you end up with the situations like Paragon B, which are now having to be demolished. I went and saw that when they stripped the cladding off, and it's all basically oriented strand board the other side behind a combustible vapor barrier. And I was looking through with bore scopes and stuff, and I said, well, the whole lot's got to be demolished. It's got to come down. It took them about 1.5 years to come to the same conclusion, but it was obvious. But that's a modern method of construction that wasn't well thought out, and they hadn't actually got in place how they join it all together. All those pipes going through, all those cables going through. You know, how do you actually fireproof modular construction?
And these interfaces between different components are so important, isn't it? And this is where the collaboration can make a big difference at an early stage, especially if you can design some out. Yeah, exactly.
Competence.
Yeah. I'll go back to Andy's point on that. I thought it was interesting when you talk about then perhaps designers or architects or engineers getting off the hook. I agree with that. I mean, I get frustrated how many times we pick up a design or a drawings and we've got more clouds and bubbles around all the junctions and says specialist contractor input or, you know, CPD and that. And you think, well, you know, there's more of that on there than there is actually that's been designed, you know. So when you're a contractor and if you're going out to look to deliver that building, the trouble is with that approach is that because you're not then engaging typically your supply chain until later in the process, you're not getting that element of design input until too late. And we've got so many clouds over the drawing that needs to be brought together. And all the revisions of the different drawings are all got lost and they haven't had that revision. So I think that's a real challenge, and I think there is an onus back on to designers and consultants to actually deal with some of those points early.
This is brilliant. One of the questions which come in relation to this is about the collaboration and reducing that void of information. Regulation 38 should require buildings to have information of what's been built, but the reality is that an as-built might not be as built.
No.
Very more often than not is not as the as-built drawings. You find that all the time. And even when you've provided this, I worked on some buildings where we had to rebuild all the CDM documentation, the fire escape plan, etc. And I won't name the company, but within 3 years they'd lost a lot. So you've got all your CDM documents, you've got all your O&Ms, you've got all your fire test standards, and this building had been up for 15 years, and it had been regularly tested for smoke alarms and everything, but I had them tested again, and on one floor all the smoke vents opened up on the floor above. And then you find the interfaces have been missing since day one. So this comes down to the maintenance as well, you know, the competence of the people looking after the building anyway, but the building had never been built properly in the first place.
And this is something the London Fire Brigade talked about in a video earlier this year, wasn't it? One of the incidents which happened in London.
Yeah.
But I think going back to your question, actually bringing the right people together early through that design and being brave enough if you're a client or if you're a contractor to actually bring in and name and bring forward your specialist supply chain into that design can bridge those gaps. I think we need it, and I think clearly that, you know, and when I'm defending architects or designers, you can't be an expert in everything. So actually you need to bring in the expertise of others to complete your design. Quite often they're precluded from doing that because a contractor or developer will say, well, don't get them involved, I want to tender that, don't do that involved, I want to do it. Actually, I think we've got to be brave enough to change that mindset and bring on key areas of the building the specialists involved early to complete that design.
But don't you find, though, that a lot of the problem is, and this goes back to probably the from the tender stage, I think, is where a lot of the time when you look at competence, we talk about competent companies. Okay, we don't actually hone down and actually look at the the competence of the individuals that are underneath that company name, that company banner. And I think that's one thing, or one of the biggest things that we've got to look at, that just because it's a recognised main name, don't always presume that the people underneath that banner or that company logo are competent individuals. And I think that's the one thing I think we've got to start talking about it a lot more. Is don't just presume that the main contractor or the main company name, which everybody will know about, are the people behind it, actually know what they're doing when they then come to be part of the design team, part of the installation team, because that's when things do go wrong.
I think the skill set lies actually, main contractors are wholly reliant on their supply chain, on their specialist contractors, and that's actually where the innovation and the skill set lies now.
Yeah,
and that's where it's gone from being there, and I think that's where there is a misconception. Yeah, and
it's that lack of communication, isn't there, between all the individual people at the right times, because they think, they must know what they're doing. So because they're part of the whole collaboration, they're part of the whole project, they must know what they're doing.
But we do have the handover phase, which is where we validate, or should be validating, which doesn't happen.
No.
So this is back to the full circle, isn't it? Of back to the ethics of things, and making sure there's process in place which actually will capture that, whether or not somebody's brought into the company from day one or whatever stage of their career that is, to make sure that that's being caught if there is something which isn't as it should be. But Tony, what's your summary and key takeaway for the audience?
I would just look more sort of at the whole day, and to my mind, I think we often come to these events and we listen a lot and we write lots down in their book, and actually we go away and we forget about it. I think, to my view, is whenever you come to these events, a couple of things will trigger some ideas in your mind, and go away and make it happen. Lots of small elements of change can add up to a big sum at the end of it. So I think it's really on all of us to, when we learn and listen and talk to people to stand up ideas, is to take a small element of that away and then go back and try and bring that into what we do in our job and into our businesses. I think that's really important from when we go to these types of events.
Arnold.
My one right at the beginning, the ability to think, not simply to take what it says on the back of a BBA certificate, but actually look behind it and actually say, does this product do what it's going to do, what it's intended to do on your particular job? Let's have a look at the test certificates, how it's tested, how it works, and then consider what you need to do from there. The competence part starts right at the top with the design, and it ends up with the people putting it in the bottom, and you need to make sure that you know how it's put in. So the ability to think and actually for yourself.
James?
Well, to be honest, I was actually going to say a lot of what Arnold says. But yeah, it's basically to have an open mind right from the word go. Because if you just think, I've done that on that project over the last 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years, and nobody has ever questioned what I've done then, so it must be all right now. Well, regulations have changed, wording has changed within them. Different methods of installing that product might have changed. So from a competence point of view, it's not so, I would say, go out and challenge other people. But the main one I would say is actually go in and challenge yourself. Challenge your own mindset, challenge your own methodology, and challenge the information that you've got in front of you, which, so like you said, Arnold, with the testing certificates. Because at the end of the day, if your design risk assessment, if your fire safety strategy, if anything there that you are relying on, and after an incident, you could be asked to then appear in court and actually rely on that information which you've done that risk assessment on, and you go, well, I went by this certificate. And that's the one thing that is coming out of Grenfell is, well, did you actually go and check that certification was right for the scenario which you've got? Because if you go and look in, and I know I probably, the GGF don't actually like me, but the GGF do actually do some really, really good things, and one of them is under BS 6180, which is looking at loading of products within a building. And where it does give you some of the graphs to look at for particular type of loading on glass infill panels and so forth, it does say down the bottom there, it says, as a small note, these charts are basically might not be a good enough calculations for the scenario which you are going to be using. So it's actually challenging you to go away and think for yourselves to say, is this certification, are these calculations right for the scenario that I've got? So yeah, that's probably the main takeaway that I would say to everybody here is challenge yourself, challenge the information that you've got in front of you.
Okay, mine's a blatant plug for the ICM. Currently, we're working with a number of the key duty holders to understand what we should be looking for as the competency of those key duty holders. If you're interested, anyone out there wants to be part of that, please contact me or through ResiBuild.
Yes.
We'd be love to hear from you. And the other thing is really read the CDM regs. It says all this.
Yeah.
It's been there for donkey's years. Well, since 2015 for this particular version. Read it and do it. It will help you, honestly.
And from my point of view, and I'm sure Andrea White, who was from the IFE Institute of Fire Engineering, who is going to join us today, but sadly can't through COVID. I know what she would probably say, which is that know your limits, know the limits of the people you work with. Is so important.
Yeah, but don't be afraid to put your hand up and ask for help in whatever thing. There's never ever a right answer or a wrong answer. Yeah, just don't be afraid to put your hand up and say, I've reached the level of my competent knowledge. I need to know more. And yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your input as a panel as well. The next panel is at 1:30. It's on a zero carbon future. So we look forward to having you back again shortly. Thanks, everyone.